The following is a conversation with a Kiwi of YouTuber fame, the host of the brilliant Hello Future Me YouTube channel, Mr. Tim Hickson. In Tim's own words, which I found on the Hello Future Me About page, Tim is a writer, world builder, video essayist, bread connoisseur, and a person who talks about The Last Airbender probably a little bit too much. Tim is also an immensely successful self-published author. He has an extensive bookshelf of stories ahead of him yet to be realized, but so far has published in various forums multiple fictional stories, mostly short, but most notably has self-published 2 tremendous successful volumes of On Writing and Worldbuilding. Tim and I run the gamut in this chat, ranging from lighthearted to the less so. We started with a bit about Tim's authorship, John Green, a person he admires very much. Something we don't know about him, Serendipity, where Tim's fascination of stories and the construction of stories and the characters within and different world building comes from. We also speak about religion, mental health, Lord of the Rings, and as well, as I will hope you agree, some fun questions interwoven throughout the piece. Alright, and look, even though Tim is a New Zealander, he's alright. He's about to cross the 1 million subscriber threshold, so if you're interested in the wonders of storytelling, your favorite characters from fiction, world building, Avatar, Lord of the Rings, and much more, do yourself a favor and go and subscribe to his wonderful channel called Hello Future Me on YouTube. There will be a link to it as well in the chat. And as well, I think this podcast is subtly informed by 2 other episodes, number 47 with Matthew Dix, and as well episode 27 with Angus Fletcher. I think these 2 podcasts kind of complement the storytelling and world-building aspects of what makes a good story in this podcast with Tim. So do hang around to the end, please, to hear my ambition for this podcast and to hear my afterthoughts, but with absolutely no further ado, here is the amazing Tim Hickson. Mr. Hickson, hello. Thank you for joining me.
Hello. I'm glad to be here. Glad to talk.
So your first upload was about 6 years ago. Among the titles was Evil Penises and Society.
Oh!
And Evidence the Earth is Flat. You've now published 2 books selling more than 50,000 copies, you said in one video, but I assume that's high now, which, puts you top 1% of the publishing distribution. And you have essentially 1 million followers on YouTube. So if you would, please guide me and the audience between here and there.
Oh man, it's a bit of a running joke in kind of my more niche community that they'll refer to whether Voldemort likes bacon and kind of these old really niche ones that only if you really dig into the past of the channel that you would know. And whenever people bring it up, I have to cringe. And you'll notice that all of those were filmed or a lot of them were filmed in lecture theatres when I was at university, because I was terrified of people hearing me record, I guess it's perform. And you can see how viscerally uncomfortable I was at the time that I filmed those. And I was just having fun trying stuff. I've had a long history of just trying different kind of small business ideas, I guess, in a way.
Oh, cool.
When I was a lot younger, I tried to start a jewelry business, funnily enough.
Nice.
I tried that for months and it didn't quite pan out. I tried a lot of different things, and YouTube was just kind of like one of the latest. It didn't take off at the time that those videos were filmed, to be clear. It took off after I stopped. So I made videos for 6 months, and they were just kind of random skits. And no one watched them. I remember thinking, I got 60 views on this video. That must be good, of which I'm sure 20 were mine. And I can tell you from experience that if you set a tab to reload on a video to count as another view over and over again, YouTube picks up on that. I can because I tried to do that with one of my old videos when I was that small, and in my last kind of few weeks, I was trying, I said, okay, it's not working out. I will try and do a few different types of videos. And I did kind of a literature analysis one where I did the Shakespeare thing. And don't watch the Shakespeare one. It's terrible and it's wrong. It's terrible. And then I did this one about like kind of moral philosophy. And again, that's terrible and wrong. And do not watch it. It's awful. There's kind of this indefensibility of freedom in making stuff you know no one's gonna watch, because you don't feel like there's any real consequence to what you make, and so you're a lot less careful about what you say, and it shows. And then my last video, I decided to talk about How to Train Your Dragon, which is a kids film series that I kind of liked because no one else was talking about it. I was like, oh, this is an interesting question. How did the Night Furies disappear? And I looked it up. No one was talking about it. I was like, all right, I guess I'll do it. I made that video. No one watched it. And moved on. Okay, I was like, okay, YouTube's dead. I tried that. Next thing. And then 6 months later, it got 200,000 views.
Holy
and
shit.
I got 500 subscribers. And I was like, what do I do with this? And so I built on that. I created more and more videos addressing that series. And then eventually, I knew right from the start that I can't do How to Train Your Dragon videos forever. Not only because that wouldn't last, but also because as much as I liked How to Train Your Dragon, it wasn't a passion of mine. You know, like, it was cool and I liked it, but I wanted to do something more meaningful that was more fulfilling in the long run. And I needed to diversify. So I added in Avatar: The Last Airbender and Lord of the Rings, which are kind of cornerstones of the channel and have been for a long time. And then things really changed when I added in the writing and worldbuilding stuff. Writing and worldbuilding being a long passion of mine. And that really kicked my channel into a new gear, brought in a whole bigger audience that was interested in education and learning, and I felt like I was doing something that mattered. And in particular, I wanted to make videos that I didn't feel were being made, and it kind of is a response to my own arts degree, because I hated my arts degree. I didn't like how they were teaching that sort of thing. I was like, I can do it better than this, I guess. And so I did. From there, as I made these videos, I turned those writing videos, I refined them and rewrote them and edited them and added in better examples and descriptions and analysis and turned them into books. And it was a gamble. It was a total gamble. You know, I'm sinking thousands of dollars into selling these books, and they would, and turns out they were a massive hit. And there's a bit of a funny story about the first volume, going beyond my audience, which I can tell you if you're interested. But yeah, I've published 2 of those now, and they've sold about 50,000 copies, and they're just educational textbooks, really. And I'm proud of them in the sense that I think it is good advice. I think it's good work that's gone into them. Yeah. So that's sort of where that happened, and things have grown since then. And I have published short stories in magazines, which is really cool. And I am out publishing fiction books now. Yeah,
mate, it's so cool, and it also is kind of like quintessential potential of the sort of new distributed economy and people living on the internet. The amount of serendipity that you've created and invited into your life due to the success on YouTube and your passion in it is culminating all these different things, which is so cool. But yeah, tell the funny story in the first publish.
Okay. So genuinely, 100%, when I made that first volume, you know, I've always had kind of a have low expectations.
That's
on
the
the
key to
internet
happiness, isn't it?
It's the key to happiness, but also online, success is never guaranteed. Falling apart is inevitable. And the collapse of everything that you've built is only a matter of time. So
on a long enough timeline, the survival rate of everything is 0.
Yeah. So I never expected much. And funnily enough, I remember telling my girlfriend very distinctly, fiance now, but I remember telling her very distinctly when my first writing video came out, I said, this is not going to go anywhere. This is going to get me 10,000 views maximum. And it got hundreds of thousands, and that was a massive change. So expected low, but same with this book, this On Writing and Worldbuilding Volume 1. I expected it to go only within my small niche audience. I set my barriers. I think I had to sell 500 or 1,000 copies to break even. And I was going to be happy with that because it was also about me kind of understanding the self-publishing process. And because of that, I only wrote it for that really niche audience. And of course, because of how my channel is built, there's a lot of references to Avatar: The Last Airbender. And everyone who bought the book in my audience, in that niche core audience, knows that. And so they read it and they go, he's referencing Avatar: The Last Airbender. It's a thing on his channel. It makes total sense. But then it started to get so popular that it went beyond my audience to people who did not know who I am and were just seeing this writing book getting sold a lot and getting good reviews. And so basically I started getting reviews of people going, this guy is obsessed with The Last Airbender, a children's show. He keeps on referring to it. And I'm going, oh no, it's not the best example of everything, but it is an example my audience understands. And so I did not anticipate in the slightest that was going to happen. So I got a bit of flack from that from the outside audience. But the result of that is that Volume 2 is written for the broader audience. And I think that is really better. That really has really bettered the book. Yeah.
Yeah, the Volume 1 I was looking just before, it had like 1,500 reviews, 5 fully filled in stars. I mean, it's like overwhelmingly positive. But then I did read those exact comments. For some reason, Amazon filters right to the top the 2 or 3 comments that you probably don't want the people to read. But yeah.
Well, the reason is people upvote negative comments more than they upvote positive comments. Which I don't read Amazon reviews anymore. It's too stressful.
Yeah.
That's just the nature of it.
But how do you explain the popularity of it going beyond your very, well, it wasn't a small niche, but at least your particular niche? Because it is a very niche book, right? Presumably, the only people interested in it would be who themselves are trying to create a world. Obviously, it goes beyond that as well. But to sell that many copies for essentially a textbook is how do you explain that?
I have an advantage, which is I have an audience, obviously. I don't want to pretend like the book is just so amazing that everyone bought it. Like everyone just got word of how incredible this textbook was and couldn't help but spend money on it. People did buy it partly because they follow me and trust my advice.
Right.
I know that a lot of people bought it because videos are kind of unwieldy. If you want to find a piece of information, it's not easy to scan through a video, and it's also a little bit harder to retain that information. And books just make it easier. So that's why some people bought it, and I think that's why people bought it necessarily more than I was thinking. And I probably underestimated how big that core audience was to start with. But in terms of getting bigger than that, a lot of people buy self-help books, how to do this, how to, how many times do people buy how to start a business books, right? Or parenting books, they're all about learning and education. But the one thing that they all have in common is that they're people trying to further a passion of theirs, right? Something that's incredibly important to them personally in terms of their construction of self and their goals in life. And the books really fell into that audience, I think, in many respects. People who want to learn how to write, but aren't necessarily sure where to start. Or in my particular case, most books in that area are written for an older audience. And what I mean by that is the examples that they use. Like, I've got a bunch up there. I've got John Truby's The Anatomy of Story. I've got Orson Scott Card's science fiction and fantasy writing. I've got K.M. Whalen's stuff. K.M. Whalen's stuff is good for what I'm about to talk about. But they use older references, okay? They use references to films that came out in the 60s. They use a lot of classic book references. And I think that those are good. You know, these films and stuff are classics for a reason, but they're not actually that accessible to younger audiences. They're not actually that accessible. Like, even people in their 30s and 40s, you know, who grew up in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, they have an entire different set of stories that we sort of draw on and we remember. And one thing I've always wanted to do with my videos is make them accessible to that audience. Use references that they know. And I do incorporate classics, and I do incorporate those iconic cornerstone stories. But I want to people are going to internalize and understand points that you want to make if you do it in the context of stories that they know and love. Way easier. Especially because a lot of the time when people write, they write to emulate stories that they love. They had an experience and they want to create that for someone else. And a lot of these writing books just don't have those references, those contexts that are easy for a lot of younger people in particular to relate to. And so I feel like a lot of younger people, you know, 30s and under, were buying my book and finding my book helpful over some of those older ones, potentially. It's a pet theory. I don't really know, but it is something that I do get feedback on. I know that in my comments and stuff, people say that they really appreciate that I use those more accessible examples. Yeah.
Did you also, as a part of your research or just your own personal interest, have you consumed those classics, the films and the books?
Yeah, I mean, I'm. It sounds really obnoxious to say. Like I'm pretty well rounded in terms of my exposure to classics.
Give me an example. What is a classic?
A classic book or classic film?
Both.
Or...
What these other world building books are referring to.
Oh, you know, they'll, give me a second. I'll get, 1 second. So, John Truby's here. He's got references to, Goodfellas, Prizzy's Honor, The Cherry Orchard, Madame Bovary, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which a lot of people have. The Odyssey, you know.
Does it get
Dracula.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Dracula. And we got Shining here, which is, you know, it's a classic book that a lot of people have read. That one's newer. What else we got? It's Chinatown.
It's just the reason I ask is I wonder whether the references you have, are they just as good as these classics, the lessons and the stories within, you know? Or is there another element of the stories have evolved and so the lessons have also evolved, rather than you just simply readapting the old truisms for the new stories?
There's two things I want to say to that. Number one, I do not always use the best example I can. There's a few reasons for that. I might refer to Lord of the Rings or Avatar: The Last Airbender, you know, for a particular beat. Partly because online on YouTube you need to make it kind of clickable. There's a clickability element to that, and people click on things they know, and so you want to attract that audience. So there's definitely that element. But also, I think that you need a good example. You don't always need the best example. And the classics are sometimes better examples to use, and I do use them. If you go through my videos, you know, I've got a list of references at the start of each chapter. Let's go. Handling pacing. So I've got The Rest of Us Just Live Here by Patrick Ness, The Perks of Being a Wallflower. I've got Bear Town by Frederick Bachman. And those are all kind of more modern stories. But then we've also got, you know, Wizard of Earthsea. We've got... we've got, you know, references to Shakespeare. We've got references to 1984. We've got references back to Jane Eyre, as well, thrown in there. So there are. I try to give a mix of classic references and modern references. And I think that balance is really valuable, really important. Because I think that returning to the classics, they're classics a lot of the time for a really good reason. They are profound. They are literature changing. They are incredibly important.
Sorry, could it be that they're classics just because of survivorship bias? Not all of them, obviously, but a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to dismiss that as a possibility. There are times where I think that if books came out now, books that came out beforehand, they would be viewed as masterpieces for the ages.
Oh yeah, give us an example.
There is always, I would probably say, I'd say things like House of Leaves by Mark Z. Danielewski. It's the most bizarre book I have. Yeah. Yeah, it's the weird book. It's incredible. Really, it's amazing. But it's absolutely insane. Susanna Clarke's Piranesi is really quite profound. It has actually won awards, so it is getting a lot of recognition for that, which is really good. But I mean, I don't know what its longevity will be. I reckon a lot of Adrian Tchaikovsky's work, Children of Time, if that came out now, if that came out during the Clarke era, during the early science fiction era, he would be renowned as easily the best science fiction writer of the day. The thing is, you look at those early sci-fi books, they were so much a cornerstone writing because of the ideas that they developed and introduced and stuff like that. They were new in many senses. The writing, a lot of the time, isn't that good. Asimov is not a good writer, okay? I've read his books. He's not a particularly good writer. His prose is very wooden, his characters are entirely flat, and his ideas, though cool, are okay. Yeah, they're pretty cool, but I mean, I've seen books that do what he does better. And so there are a lot of books that come out now that if they came out then, would be equal as classics, or if not better. So I do agree that there is sometimes a reverence for classics because they're classics and not necessarily because they are inherently better than examples we can provide nowadays, which is something that I've always wanted to be consciously aware of, and it's why I like referencing modern stuff as well, because I think there's so much good stuff that has come out in the last decade, 2 decades, that deserves just as much credit, really.
Take me back to the self-publishing question. I was really interested in that as well because of the volume of the books you were selling, and presumably a lot of the audience being in the US. I mean, you're over in New Zealand. Were you sort of printing them locally and shipping them off yourself? The missus. No. Okay. So
no. Okay. No. That's all done by Amazon. There's no printing in New Zealand at all. Prints it. Yeah, Amazon prints it. Amazon has their own press. The second volume was also done through another company as well, Lightning Source or something, and they all print it and distribute it to other people, and it's relatively hands-off on my end. But I did one time. Yeah, goodness, I am not processing 50,000 books. Goodness, I tried to, for patrons, I said, you guys can buy signed copies for this much, and 200 of them wanted one. I was like, oh gosh. So I had to single-handedly package and sign and send off 200 packages. And that was a mission. I turned up at the post office with a huge wheelbarrow, and it's just I need to send off 200 books, and they sent over one guy, and he's like, all right, this is your job for the day. So, yeah, no, I would not want to do that 50,000 copies.
And what about Audible? Are you going to narrate it?
There is an audiobook of Volume 1 out, and Volume 2 should be out really damn soon.
Are you narrating it?
No. So it's really hard to it's really hard to do audiobook narration for me because I'm so critical of how I sound. It's a lot easier when you're the one approving it. It's so much easier to have someone else read it because you don't pick up on all the imperfections in their own voice, really.
Sure.
So when I record a video, if I'm recording a 4,000 word video, it'll take me a couple of hours. All right, and the audio version for that doesn't need to be nearly as perfect as it would be for an audiobook.
Yeah, the standard's so high.
So it'd just be absolutely awful. I hate going through my own voice. Absolutely not. So I've paid a friend to do it.
Okay, nice. I want to circle back to the first thing that you mentioned. You said that you were recording in a university lecture hall. Surely that wasn't the most private place you could find. You know, what?
Well, I mean, the lecture halls were empty. Yeah, they provided. I don't know. It was at university. I had to film at university because I didn't feel comfortable filming at home, and generally I had to film somewhere inside. So
because of judgment from the family.
Not judgment. They weren't judging me. I've always been a weird kid. They were not going to judge me, but I felt self-conscious about it, definitely. And they could arrive home at any time. So, yeah, no, do it at university.
How self-conscious are you today when you do it?
Oh, no. 5 years into it, mate. Nothing phases
really?
me
Okay,
anymore.
Nice.
Yeah. No. You get over that slowly. I can sit down and record anytime. And I'm very comfortable on camera now, and you can see the difference. You can see how uncomfortable I was. In my very early days, I didn't know the difference between being expressive and being comfortable on camera, and so I would just try to hype myself up and just be really expressive. Hey, how we going? So this is what we're doing today. We're gonna talk about this dragon. We're gonna talk about this chapter of things, and so I had to sort of get over that nervousness. I would just go ham, camp, and now I don't really have that. Now I'm a lot more measured. I'm very comfortable talking in front of the camera.
And give me some more examples of your small business ideas, because like you said off air, I mean, you're 26, you started YouTube when you were 20. I feel like, I mean, have you worked like an office job ever or a regular job? Or has it just been YouTube has like paid the bills from the go? And basically I asked like 10 questions there, but
I am very, very lucky. So when I was at school, I tried to get my writing out there.
No way, you were writing in school as well.
On Wattpad. Yeah, on Wattpad. I did it on Wattpad. Wattpad's like you put writing up online and there's people who read it. That's pretty much it. Okay. And I actually had some success there. I had like 50,000 reads on a book I wrote.
Holy shit.
And I did it, funnily enough, I did it right through to the very start of my, in some capacity, right through to the very start of my YouTube channel, which is when you look at my earliest videos, you can actually see I say, go check out my Wattpad, go check out my writing, because I wanted that to be, I thought, well, like, if I get a really popular book on Wattpad, I can get a publishing contract, become an author, blah, 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 blah. But I very quickly realized, oh crap, that's not good. Don't want people reading that, so I deleted that. And so there's a message. You can go to my old Wattpad account and you can find, thank you very much for checking this out. It's very kind that you thought you would check out my writing. Unfortunately, I'm not prepared to show what I had written here. So that was one thing I did. I tried freelance editing and writing and proofreading for a long time. I actually had some success with that. I did basically on Fiverr and People Per Hour, those sort of things. It's a very, very difficult industry to break into. You have to do a lot of work for absolute pennies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I definitely I tried to do that. And I did contracts. I did short stories for people, for for board games, and that was contract work, basically. I didn't make a huge amount of money, but I did it for a while. I did try to run a jewelry business by buying secondhand jewelry, or buying jewelry that didn't sell at a really cheap rate, and then reselling it at a higher price. And that didn't pan out either.
What happened there? Auckland's
I just
local
didn't make enough money.
muscle got involved?
No. It's I sold it on Trade Me, which is basically New Zealand eBay, and it just, I mean, people bought some stuff, but I was usually barely breaking even, and the supply of jewelry wasn't always guaranteed. So yeah, it was very guess and wish-washy. What else did I try? I'm sure I tried other stuff. I tried other stuff. I tried when I was really young to become a chef and like make my own muesli bars.
Legend.
Doesn't matter.
I love that.
Yeah. But I was a lifeguard throughout. After I finished school, I became a lifeguard at a pool, which I trained at for my entire life. And I was also a horror maze actor at the time. So on Fridays and Saturday nights, I would go and be a horror maze actor, and I would scare people in corn and dress up and stuff like that, and paid pretty well.
Yeah.
But the lifeguard thing, that was hourly work. Yeah, it was a brilliant job. It was a lot of fun. And then the government stole our land. So
took the jobs.
Yeah. So I did that, and I was a lifeguard as well, which was, I mean, that's about as boring as it sounds, except for the time that I nearly poisoned the entire pool. Yeah. So, and then YouTube, I started doing YouTube in like my second year of uni or something like that. It didn't take off, and then in my final year of uni, or second to last year of uni, it started to really take off. And I was like, okay, if I'm going to make this work, I need to put in all my hours. And so in my last year, I basically said, I'm not going to worry about my grades. I'm just going to focus on YouTube.
Right on.
And I did. And my grades actually didn't take a hit, funnily enough.
Yeah, but you're a smart guy. I mean, like, you can feign interest at university, right? I mean,
well, I liked law. I actually really enjoyed law.
Oh, you're doing law?
I have 2 degrees.
Arts. Okay.
I have 2 degrees. Yeah, I have 2 degrees and a double major. I've got a law degree and an arts degree with a double major. All right,
take back
in
my
English
comment.
And political philosophy.
Nice. Wow. So you managed to, without putting in much effort, be able to pass sufficiently enough to graduate with a law degree. I mean, that's a massive achievement, right?
I mean, yeah, like I wasn't just passed. Like, I mean, I was like an A student. Like, I mean, I didn't like give up because I could not let myself give up, you know. But I was like, it's okay if I get less than an A minus, you know. I sort of let myself have that breadth. I wasn't gonna let myself fail anything, and I wasn't probably gonna let myself get a C. I was not doing C's to get degrees, but I definitely was lowering the standards for myself, I guess, in that final year. It paid off, and by the time I finished university, I was doing. It sounded really obnoxious being like, I'm an A student. That's so.
No, it's not. It's. I don't think so.
But yeah, no. By the time I finished university, YouTube was ready to go, and so I just continued with that.
And that was, I guess, 4 years ago. Forgive me for being so specific about the timeline. I was just really trying to get a sense for, your story, what it was like.
2017, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So 2 years into the YouTube, you're graduating university, and now 4 years later, you've got all these business proposals and opportunities coming your way. I suppose this is maybe something that could wait for later, but it seems like a natural time to ask. What's the most sort of serendipitous opportunity or serendipitous outcome that has been presented to you because of having such a big audience and producing in the niche that you presumably own on YouTube at least?
Oh, there's so many answers I could give to that. If you asked my 12-year-old self, then I'd say the ability to talk to Christopher Paolini, the author of the Inheritance saga, the Inheritance cycle, because when I was 12 years old, I loved Eragon and Eldest and Brazinger and Inheritance, like that series. That was my world, and I so wanted to be him, pretty much. So if you ask after that, the most serendipitous moment. It's not really a moment, but it's more the sense that a couple of times I've had like projects which I've poured my heart and soul into, which would be the complex relationship between mental illness and fiction, probably Azula's psychology, which were just deep passion projects for me, and getting the reception that they did. There's something deeply personal and validating about putting a lot of effort into something you love creatively and getting that feedback. And it was kind of the first time I'd had that level of positive feedback on something creative. And it's really what it's all about, I guess, for me, in a sense. In the more broader sense, it would be that this job has given me the freedom to write as part of my job. I try to take at least one day a week to sit down and write fiction books, and at some point in the future those are going to come out, and that is an opportunity that I would not have if I was doing a 9-to-5 job, if I was doing a law job. The ability to write in the way that I do is just life-changing. It's deeply personal, and it is the thing that makes my life, like, I can't imagine my life without it, really.
You must look up to John Green so much. Like the sort of education on YouTube turned author, right?
Did you pick up on that? Like, so when you say I must look up to John Green, did you know that I'm a John Green fan?
Well,
or is that you through deduction?
No. I know that in your book on your video on the 7 books or stories that changed my life, it featured John Green. And I think I saw on the bookshelf in one of your things. I mean, presumably, I think it was like 4 or 5 John Green books. But just as you were saying it, I don't know. It made me think that.
No,
it's a similar trajectory to John Green.
I really do like John Green's writing. One of his books, Paper Towns, really did deeply affect me, and I talked about that. I don't think he's the best writer in the world, but I don't think that someone has to be the best writer for them to be your favorite, or anything like that. The stories just have to affect you, and I really like his honesty in dealing with mental illness. I like his introspective head writing a lot. And I like his ethics and approach to an online world, I guess. And he's been a leader in that area. So, I definitely have a lot of... I definitely look up to John Green as someone. My favorite quote, actually, is from him.
Oh, great.
And the quote is, I think there's something about knowing something... I think there's something about not knowing whether something exists and yet choosing to still believe. That's a lot of life to me. Choosing to invest things with meaning regardless of whether or not they have inherent meaning. And he said that on a podcast, just like offhandedly, and that stuck with me because it is so true in the sense that so much of life is about finding meaning and constructing meaning and seeing where personal meaning is. And I have in many senses developed that in my own writing. So yeah, John Green is someone that I do look up to.
And that favorite quote of his, I suppose, foreshadows the religious question that I want to ask you soon as well. But this isn't a question; it's just a comment. You spoke about sort of the one of your favorite projects might be trying to communicate to an audience, very difficult, mental health, and the theme of it written in fiction and so forth. And your videos do remind me a lot of like Stories of Old sometimes. I think like Stories of Old is, I don't know what you think about it. Presumably you like it, but I think it's just such an amazing channel. Beautiful. Like it really makes you feel, And yeah, it's not a question, it's just a comment that specifically sometimes your channel really reminds me of it.
Yeah, like Stories of Old does some good stuff. We have had a few exchanges back and forth. He's got a really nice, unique take to writing and to stories.
And he's one of the few Dutchmen who sound good in English.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Yeah, absolutely.
The mechanics of storytelling, it seems like this isn't something that you saw was a decent opportunity on YouTube and then it became an interest of yours. It sounds like just from the get-go you've been fascinated in that. So yeah, when did it sort of start, this interest in trying to understand the mechanics of a good story?
I remember when I was younger sitting down and getting Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone out and trying to understand why this book works. Like, I sat down and I took notes and I went through it and I was like, why is this story resonating with me? Yeah. And I did that for fun. I've always done that for fun. And like when I would come out of, movies, I would talk to my friends and they'd be like, what did you think? And I'd be like, oh, I love the literary symmetry between these two elements. I felt like it made the thematic dimensions of the story really resonate a bit. And they'd just look at me and they're like, what are you talking about? So I've always had a very mechanical approach to stories and figuring out why they work, the anatomy of these stories. And I guess what happened was I was looking on YouTube for writing advice videos in many senses. And I was seeing, it'd be like, oh, how do you write a first chapter? And it'd be like, introduce your character. And I'd be like, yeah, obviously. What does that mean? And so I decided to look through stories and go, okay, how do they actually introduce characters? Why do these chapters work better than others? And I looked at those commonalities and I broke that down and I wanted to be more specific. I wanted to be deeper. And so then I presented that in my own video on first chapters. And then a counterpart to this was I did an arts degree with English and I did a creative writing course and I hated it. I skipped the classes because, that's a long story, but basically it was just so shallow, so surface level look at creative writing. And I was like, I feel like there's so much deeper we can go in looking at understanding stories. And so I wanted to do that. But that love for understanding stories has always been there. And a lot of that comes from, I've always enjoyed literary commentary from the authors themselves, looking at authorial intent. So I always liked reading, why did they write this particular thing this particular way? It's because they wanted to do this, they wanted to do that, they wanted to explore a particular theme, and having that context made me enjoy reading the book more. And then likewise at school when I was doing English, I would go out of my way to kind of explore things intentionally. I wasn't just there, I guess, to get an excellence, which is it's getting an A or whatever in New Zealand. We have a terrible grading system.
Excellence. What's wrong with a good old D in HD?
Merit. We don't do it. We have excellence, merit, achieved, almost achieved, and not achieved.
That's absurd. That's so funny.
It's the dumb, yet
almost achieved.
But I wasn't there Almost achieved. I know. I wasn't there to kind of like just get the grades or mimic back what the teacher wanted. I liked exploring these things. So that interest has always been there.
You were, or are at least, a religious man, but you grew up in a religious household. Did you ever,
Yes.
I presumably you, I don't know, read the Bible. I've never read it, but I just assume maybe you might have. It was part of school or whatever. Did you apply this sort of world building critique and worldview and sort of narrative construction to the stories in there?
Oh man, that's such a that's such a weird question. It's, I mean, you can look at the Bible as a thematic study, right? As breaking down the meanings and intentions behind why it is written, why it is. And so sermons are, in many respects, taking a passage, a scene, a section, and exploring their context around surrounding context, and then the intention behind that, the deeper meaning than just the surface level what is written there. And that is a very thematic way of approaching it. And so I did that inherently by the community that I grew up in, going to church each Sunday and reading the Bible. And there were definitely times when I looked at it from a literary point of view. There's some beautiful writing in the Bible. There's a famous phrase, "through a glass darkly. Now I see through a glass darkly." And there's a bunch of books called Through a Glass Darkly, and John Green, funnily enough, wanted to call one of his books Through a Glass Darkly. And what it means is basically I don't see things clearly. I am biased. I have misconceptions. I have made mistakes. I, by nature of being a limited human, do not see things perfectly. And understanding what that means and deconstructing that in the context of our own lives was a fascinating exercise for me. And so that verse kind of stuck with me for a long while. And then you look at oh, my knowledge is fading on me. But there's give me a second. I will look it up.
Okay. Yeah, Hitchens said, Christopher Hitchens, famously dogmatic atheist, but he was like, it's actually quite a good book in parts, which, because of the writing.
It's a fascinating book to study.
Yeah. But go on, don't let me interrupt you.
Study. I think Christopher Hitchens was right in that sense, that it's a fascinating book to study, and if you look at it from an historiography point of view, and a poetry point of view, there's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. Ecclesiastes is I'd say James and Ecclesiastes were the books that resonated with me most, because they were so grounded in their look at life and what it means. Ecclesiastes being all about, life is futile and yet life is futile and yet we survive. Life is misery and yet we find happiness. Life is suffering and yet we find peace. And it's all about that look into the almost nihilistic nature of the world and constructing meaning for ourselves out of it and finding that meaning where it can. And James, on the other hand, it's a very practical book about morality in the sense that, what's the point in doing, what's the point in being good if you're not doing good? If you're not actively doing good, you can't just be passively good. You can't just be step back and kind and listen. You've got to go out of your way and actually help people. And so those resonated with me a lot in terms of applying it to my own life. And from a literary point of view, they were written in ways that I think kind of captured a lot of my feelings. Yeah. So I definitely approached it in a literary sense.
As a young
that's
boy.
one way to do it.
Yeah.
In many ways. Probably not as a young boy. As a young boy, I didn't really think that much. But yeah. As an older person, definitely.
Yeah. And today, are you still religious?
Oh man, questions are up in the air, right? It's I am as Christian as the clouds are grey,
Okay.
and I'll leave it at that.
Through the glass darkly.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
So in this book, we've mentioned John Green already. We've mentioned Paper Towns already. But in Paper Towns, particularly the theme... No, in Paper Towns, you said that the reason why it was such a powerful story to you was because of the theme of the difference between how you think of someone, how you think they are, versus how they really are. And so what are people missing in their understanding of you? Where's the difference?
Aha! Nice. Yeah, nice twist on that question. Yeah, okay. What are people missing about me? It's, being an online personality in many senses, there is so much of me online. But people also do have a very cultivated understanding of who I am through my videos. Everything I say in my videos is scripted. All my jokes, most of my jokes are scripted. Confidence is in many senses scripted. I am a confident person. I always have been. And so I think probably something that a lot of people miss about me is they probably think I'm quite extroverted. That I'm quite out there, potentially. I'm a very introverted person. I tend to be very happy on my own. And I don't need a lot of people, interaction, that sort of thing. What are people missing about me? People know I'm a cat person. People know I'm into board games. People know I am... I'm into reading. People think that I am a really avid world builder, funnily enough. When people think about my books, what they expect me to write, they think I'm going to come out with a really in-depth sci-fi world with huge world building and empires, and it's going to be a big adventure fantasy science fiction series. And to be perfectly honest, I like kind of more literary science fiction, I don't really care that much for big world building. I like looking at it from kind of a study point of view. I like kind of figuring out how the world works. I've always enjoyed lore dumps. But it doesn't hold that much interest for me to write. I loved Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation, which is not a book big on world building, but it is an incredible science fiction book about deconstruction of the self and the connection between oneself and one's past and the world around you. And those ideas are what I'm there for. And so people think I'm also really big on fantasy, and I used to be. I will be honest, I used to be. I used to be a massive fantasy reader and writer, but I have, over the last kind of 5 years, 4 years, 3 years maybe, I have definitely begun to prefer science fiction, and I prefer literary science fiction and fantasy. Stuff which isn't epic fantasy, big battles and chosen ones and stuff like that. I like stuff that's a lot more low-key. And that really comes out in the reading and writing that I kind of do. I just finished Neil Gaiman's The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which is a very subtle piece it's a love letter to the worldview of children. And it's not a big, it's got very soft world building, which is a term I discuss on the channel, about kind of using minimalistic world building that uses the unknown to invite you to imagine more, which is also very much Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation. So, yeah, I think that's probably the biggest misconception people have about me and my reading and writing preferences. And so when people come out, well, I've got 2 books. I've got a new adult book which deals with mental health, of which there is almost no speculative element, and people are going to be pretty shocked with that. And then there's also a science fiction book which I'm writing, which, yes, has world building, but I don't really care if it's realistic. It's all about the vibe and atmosphere that I'm creating. It's an exploration of loss and grief and identity in the wake of that.
Tell me more about the mental health book. Is this the sci-fi that you just said you like have submitted to publishers recently?
So it's to call it sci-fi would be dishonest. It has a science fiction element, but it is not a science fiction story. It's no more a science fiction story than... I'm trying to think of a good comparison. I shouldn't have put myself on the spot like that. Patrick Ness's The Rest of Us Just Live Here is a story about kids who are going through issues and mental health and their relationships breaking apart. And there's one guy who has magic powers, basically. And those magic powers don't play a key role in the story, except he heals something at the end, pretty much. And that is it. And that's kind of the same vibe, is that it sure, there's a science fiction element, but it is only there to support the thematic exploration of mental health and self-harm and suicide, and what it means to help someone, and how helping someone can damage us, and how we heal from that, how we put up boundaries, how we put up how we kind of manage those feelings of duty and responsibility. So yeah, those are definitely... That's sort of the mental health book. It's about learning what it means to help, and it's about learning the consequences of helping. That dragging ourselves into it can mean we feel responsible, can mean we feel like it's all down to us. And that's something that I have a lot of experience with, and it can be pretty damaging.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to write about those experiences, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Tell me if it's too personal. But you used to work at the suicide and self-harm hotline.
Still do.
You've just spoken about... Oh, you still do?
Yep.
And you've just spoken about a book you've written about in the topic of mental health, and it's something you've dealt with personally. Why is it such a fascinating, interesting, maybe they're the wrong words, but that's at least how I interpret it, like topic to you and condition?
Yeah, it's a mix of past struggles of my own, but also being... I've been in a relationship in the past where the person I was with was in a very dark place, and they tried to kill themselves multiple times, and I was too young to deal with that. I was at school, and I got a text saying, "I love you, but goodbye. I'm going to kill myself now." And I did not know how to handle that, and I didn't handle it well. And that had a long-term effects on me and my sense of like what I should have done differently. And so that was it led me along the path to wanting to learn more about how to deal with that, to get confidence with it. I've also, a lot of my closest friends have been in similar dark spaces. And so I've been surrounded by it for a long time. And that really drove me to join that helpline and get those skills. And I've been with it for about 5 years now. 5 years. Yeah.
And how did you deal with that and continue to deal with it, being so close to it?
Learning
yourself.
Yeah. Learning, getting confidence. The biggest, scariest thing is not knowing what to do, really. At least it was for me. It was the sense of you want to be able to fix it, but you don't know how. And one of the things you sort of learn is that fixing it isn't necessarily possible, at least not for you. And fixing it is a very long-term struggle, change, that you can be there for, that you can support, but you can't make happen, you know. And so there was therapy involved, and it was very much a journey towards knowing what I can do at what time, and knowing what I can't do, and knowing when something does go wrong, what do you do, and having that knowledge feels like you're prepared, you know. And so understanding the most important elements of risk and stuff like that, even knowing who to take them to, if possible, and watching out for those for my own thoughts, and learning how to handle those. Yeah, so it's a complicated world, really. But I am really glad that I have learned in what I have, and have grown since. And yeah.
I think what you said when you were describing the book that you've written on the topic, you said that how when you get involved, dealing with the fact that maybe you've taken on the responsibility, and then you might feel maybe not burdened, but you'd feel like you're now almost responsible for what ends up happening. I mean, I think that's a really good insight. But you're also there at the self-help line. Do you feel like this is you sort of plunging yourself into taking on the responsibilities of others? And this isn't a prepared question. It's just something that came up to draw the line between those two points.
No, it's doing it in a safe context. Because, I mean, you can sort of... I mean, I could be brutally honest and look at it as sort of like a making up for my past mistakes, or making up for, you know, like, I couldn't do that before, I can do it now, if you really want to draw that sort of line. Putting myself purposefully in that area, it's, you know, it makes you feel good that you're doing that you're helping that. But you're doing it in a safe context. You know, for one, when I leave that place, I can put away what's happening there. Like, people ask me, you know, it's funny, the more experienced ones at the helpline, you know, will be asked, you know, oh, what calls have you had? What texts have you been having? You know, what discussions have you been having? And most of us will be like, I have no idea. I can't remember any of them. Because you compartmentalize it. And that's a good thing. We're encouraged to compartmentalize it. When you're there, you're there. When you're not, you're not. Because you can't spend time trying to figure out, you know, trying to make sure everything's handled at all times. And it is in many senses the people who struggle with that sort of dynamic in their day-to-day life. It's the inescapability of it. One of the most difficult feelings is, I shouldn't be thinking about this when I have this worry about this other person. I don't know what they're thinking right now. I don't know how they're feeling. They could be trying to kill themselves right now. And you are... that feeling dominates your thought process. And on top of that, there's the sense of, I can't be happy because there's that stuff going on. How can I take time to do this thing to be happy when I've got this responsibility on my shoulders? And that's really it's really self-destructive in a sense. And so being at the helpline, you know, you don't have that. It's a very safe way to help, but knowing that there is a safety net when you leave, that other people will take over. Yeah. Yeah,
so you're not like the person's one point of contact and that sort of thing.
Yeah. That tends to be the case. And I've dealt with some pretty dark stuff at the helpline. You know, I can't give details, but it's people on the bridge type level of stuff. Children are definitely the most difficult. But you're doing it in a safe context.
I wonder how much this resonates with you. I don't remember where I heard it from, whether it was a TV character, movie character, or book character, but it was that some people just have a nerve ending exposed to the world. And that was a way to explain mostly sort of manic behavior and mood swings. And, you can see it and in people. And I just wonder how much it resonates with you because, maybe, I don't know. It just in the context of speaking about mental health, I think that's a... something that always stands out to me, and I can sort of see that in specifically the cases of just quite simply like a chemically induced depression, people that can be ecstatically happy and then, terribly down and sad. I think it's quite a beautiful, they just have their nerves exposed to the world. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. Some people do have that sort of feeling. I actually probably am not that sort of person, I think. I'm very affected by my own experiences, but I guess I am not constantly wrapped up in the horrible things of the world, which is in a way a good thing. But I try to be aware of those most horrible things, at least.
I don't think it was a comment necessarily to say exposed to world events, but just that they themselves, their own emotions were not under a layer of skin, right? They were on the top and therefore more sensitive and sort of easily rubbed. Like that I think that was more the interpretation.
Right. Yeah, some people are like that. Some people like that, definitely.
Look, I think I will transition, but and I'm editing, right? But just so you know, I mean, I do think it's like an interesting conversation as well, broader sort of depression, and I'm not sure what it's like in New Zealand. I mean, I'm in Sweden, famously.
In Sweden?
Yeah, I'm in Stockholm. Yeah.
Oh wow! Are you
So,
guys gonna join NATO?
So it's like, famously, one of the highest suicide rates per capita and the most antidepressants per capita, all this sort of stuff. And I do find it really, really interesting. But yeah, what do you reckon? Is it worth talking about, or should we transition back into world building?
Well, I can tell you, New Zealand has the highest youth suicide rate in the world.
Does it actually?
Yep. Higher than Finland, higher than Sweden.
What is the explanation of that?
Oh, it's complicated. I mean, I would be going into speculation on that. Actually, is Sweden on this chart? Are you guys you guys are in the OECD, surely?
Yeah, for sure.
Where are you guys? Sweden. Yeah, you guys are a bit. Yeah, we are.
15 to 19 OECD countries. This is from 2008 though, so it might be outdated. But New Zealand is at 15 point something, followed by Finland at about 12.
I mean, can you speculate as to why that is? I'm shocked to hear that for New Zealand because, the classic explanation for the Scandinavian countries is just the winter depression, a combination of it's like a combination of a lack of the vitamin D, whatever that is, lack of sun, in addition to just being extraordinarily egalitarian. This is me sort of projecting my own theory, but like such an egalitarian culture where you're born being told your whole life you're in one of the best countries in the world, the most equal countries in the world, and so you can do whatever you like. There's like no excuse for not being able to become the person that you sort of know deep down you could be. And not everyone can become the person they want to be, just because it's a hard thing to do. And so because of that, there's like I think that like story your whole life and then sort of becoming an adult and realizing it's not that easy.
It's
and then
disillusioning.
Really. Yeah. And then having such an easy access to antidepressants, I think makes it worse.
Yeah,
as well.
you guys have huge amounts of drug consumption, don't you?
Drug?
Like, sorry, when I say drugs, like antidepressants. Like, I think
antidepressants.
I think I remember something like Norway has, is just like huge amounts of antidepressants being consumed.
Shitloads.
why New Zealand has such a high youth suicide rate. I am not an expert in this field. I can only really speak to kind of my personal experiences and the data and stuff that I sort of picked up a bit kind of through osmosis through working at this suicide helpline. It's partly because of high rates of child abuse, I think. There's strong correlations between child abuse and suicide in teenage years, suicide attempts, and we have a shockingly high child abuse rate, and that's reflected.
I'm shocked by that.
It's complex socioeconomic stuff. Being in a post-colonial country, there is poverty elements that kind of lower socioeconomic elements that build into that.
Like an overrepresentation by the minorities of New Zealand.
Well, I mean, it's. I mean, that's not entirely true. No, because I mean, if you want to look really deeply at the data, you know, it's, in fact, to be honest, it's probably not worth getting into this particular discussion on the podcast. But I will tell you that child abuse rates are higher on average in certain demographics, partly because they are in poverty. But if you look at like pedophilia data, it's an overwhelmingly European problem in New Zealand. It's complicated, and I don't want any listeners to get the impression that what I'm saying is child abuse is a result of cultural differences, because I'm not an expert, and that would be a terrible conclusion for me to be coming out with. The reason that I would say is probably it's shockingly high rates of child abuse, which translates to suicide rates later on in life. We don't have a particularly good mental health support system, and part of that is cultural. In New Zealand, talking about your problems is it's not like, I don't know what it's like in Europe, but talking about your problems not particularly encouraged, culturally speaking. It's especially among men. There's very much the sense of leave people alone, leave people to their own issues. It's a bit weird to talk about it, that sort of thing.
That's the worst, isn't it? That's the same in Australia.
Yeah. New Zealand and Australia have that in many senses in common. And then there's an interesting statistic, which is that suicide rates are just way higher in higher socioeconomic countries. At least by the data that we have. The data of really poorer countries, obviously it's very hard to get. You're not going to get accurate suicide rates from North Korea. But there's a bunch of reasons for that, which are really complicated. And if you are interested in learning about that, I recommend looking it up and studying that a bit more for yourself, because it is a very strange statistic that basically higher economic earnings lead to higher suicide rates on average for some reason. But that's why it is.
I kind of think that it is a very simplistic take, but just because it's simplistic doesn't mean it doesn't have an element of truth. If you look at, and the reporting's not as good as maybe in the OECD countries, but it's still you can still get a decent slice for how people are dying within a populace, right? And so you can then extrapolate out and know the cause of death. India's 1 billion people, China's 1.4 billion. There's shit tons of people around the world in, Mexico as well, 150 million people, and they have famously low suicide rates. And I think the reason why it might be higher in, high socioeconomic countries could just be the simple reason that things are easier, there is less difficulty, and when all of your needs are met with very low effort, you start asking the bigger questions, and that's not enough to, for some it is, but generally that wouldn't be enough to sort of make you depressed, looking for meaning in the world and so forth. But that in combination with what I said before, sort of being told you can do whatever you want, but then realizing that you in fact might not be capable of doing what you want. It's like one of the hardest truths ever. And then you throw in antidepressants.
Yeah. So suicide is typically connected to things like massive changes in one's life, like losing a job, losing a partner. It's connected to anniversaries, like this is the time that my daughter died, that sort of thing. And I think potentially those moments become more important in a life where everything is in many ways provided. You look at Japan, which has a very high suicide rate. And the people build their identity around their job a lot more. Which, yeah, it's pop speculation on that front, but I don't know. I'd have to look into it more to give you an exact answer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not asking you for the answer, but just generally to speculate. But okay, let's transition back into the world building, if you don't mind.
No, of course. We can change gears, go from super dark to super light.
Tim, to make a rather awkward transition, but one we've agreed to make nonetheless. In our email exchange, I think you articulated really, really well how I feel about the hero's journey. Because I thought the hero's journey, world building, Tim's going to be all over this. And you said Campbell was writing about why stories resonate and the structures of those stories, what they share in common, rather than giving this explicit list for how to write a story, and the writer's journey, which was adapted by Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces, famously has just got its tentacles into all of the big Hollywood stories. I heard in an interview, Jon Favreau say that his movie Chef was just written explicitly from the hero's journey. And you can actually, after he said that, I watched it because it's a great movie. And
George Lucas said the same, by the way. He was very, very close to. I think he lectured under John Campbell or something.
Oh really? I didn't know.
Yeah, he has some more explicit connection, but he basically just wrote Star Wars to be the hero's journey.
Exactly. But it's so funny once you sort of just take a very casual look at the steps, and it's like call to action, refusal of the call, and then you actually go on the journey, venturing into the dragon's lair, as explicitly as possible sometimes. So anyway, I just with that as the preamble, basically, I wanted to ask you about if you could sort of reflect more openly on the hero's journey and where it sort of fits into your worldview.
The hero's journey is, as I said in the email, it's descriptive, not prescriptive. It's describing why stories resonate rather than describing how we should write stories. To me, it doesn't hold that much importance. It's kind of like, using the 3-act structure in a way. The 3-act structure resonates for a really good reason. But to tell someone you should write your story with a 3-act structure with this explicit structure in mind, to me is limiting. It's good advice to someone starting out because you can sort of, it's a quick hand way of getting them to a point where a story is functional. If someone knows nothing about storytelling, telling them, do the hero's journey, have a darkest hour, have an inciting incident, it's a quick hand way to get something that resembles a functional story. But that's about as useful as it gets for me. I think it's actually more useful for someone who wants to understand stories conceptually and then wants to challenge those conceptions. So if you understand why the hero's journey works, you can understand potentially why your story isn't resonating as well as people might think, because, well, it doesn't have a darkest hour. Oh, I don't have a darkest hour. That's right. And people really like darkest hours. Okay, great. But also, you can look at those story elements and you can rearrange them, and you can challenge those assumptions, and you can subvert those structures to be more to write the story that you want to write, keeping in mind kind of why people like certain types of stories and finding new ways to achieve that. Yeah. So it doesn't hold that much importance to me personally. I think it's too broad to be applied as helpful advice. And it's a lot more to do with teaching people the basics, I guess. What he wrote was profound for its time because he articulated something in the subconscious, which is a very interesting thought process. It's an interesting thought experiment. But there's nothing that I would kind of like worship as particularly profound. You know, he's kind of pointing out stuff that's underneath all the stories that we write. But he's good at articulating why they resonate. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't really know how to answer that question.
No, it's good, it's good. Perhaps this one might make a little bit more sense, and it does get a touch woo-woo. But what about Jungian archetypes?
Gosh.
How do they fit into the world building, and how seriously do you take them? Because I noticed, by the way, I went on the search of your channel, and there was no video with the name Archetypes in the title, so I found that quite perplexing.
I don't really know that much about Jungian archetypes. As far as I'm aware, they're a lot more to do with psychology than they are with writing.
Yeah, but they're like the whole... I mean, that's what Campbell was going off, Jungian archetypes. The idea of this subconscious characters and subconscious storylines that play in our collective subconscious. That's why it gets a little bit woo-woo.
Yeah,
but,
no,
like, it's his like explanation of theory of everything almost. Why
it does
we are who
feel
we
like
are,
a
why we
theory
like
of
what we
everything,
like.
you know. Yeah, Jungian archetypes. I this is such a... I don't know off the top of my head. I would say Jungian archetypes are an interesting way of analyzing stories, but they're not like ways to instruct someone to write a story. I guess.
Maybe a way to write characters, not the story as the whole. I mean, because they are like... The whole point of the archetype is character specific, and if one archetype is there, then it sort of requires one to complement it here. I mean, it's throughout Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah, but like, I mean, for every story, I guess I'm quite wary of... I don't know. I really don't know how to respond to that. I'm so sorry.
It's okay,
I've
mate.
never thought about Jungian archetypes as a way.
Really?
To look at
I shouldn't have brought up Jung. Well, maybe one day when you come
I've
through
always
Stockholm.
thought of it as like the way that we more relate to like other people and the roles that people play in our lives, more than like archetypes for writing. Like they're definitely in there, absolutely, but what I will say is that stories that play on the collective subconscious, because I do think that there is a collective subconscious, stories are used to discuss things in the abstract.
You do think there's a collective unconscious?
I think there's a collective unconscious in the sense that humanity and society as a whole is always having ongoing discussions. And we're often using stories to vicariously discuss those. And we look for stories that resonate with things that lack in our lives. There's a reason that some people will, be really touched by a story with a mother archetype, a grandmother archetype, that the where they don't necessarily have that in their own lives. And you'll notice that stories say if humanity is in a particularly hopeless period, we use stories to reflect those feelings and to find meaning. You know, you look at stories written during the war. You look at, I think it was the Myth of Sisyphus, which was written. I think that was written during World War II, or at least it was written when he was. When he came out of World War II or something, and there's a lot of discussions about how do we process the fact that this giant world war kind of just happened, on a collective level. How do we face the fact that everything feels like it's falling apart? And so I think that stories do address those, and I like stories that on some subconscious level address things that we are concerned about and personally worried about. And a lot of like epic fantasy doesn't necessarily do that for me. You know, you look at a lot of epic science fiction, epic fantasy, and a lot of them will be really fun stories with great characters, and they're a lot of fun. But the reason they don't necessarily resonate with me is that they don't spend a lot of their time delving into the deeper psychological stuff that I'm really interested in reading about, I guess, which a lot of the time plays into that collective subconscious type thing. Yeah, and I would think like a recent example of that would be things like Arrival or Blade Runner 2049, which are these films that delve really deeply into... Blade Runner 2049 delves into a desolated world. Is desolated a word? Desolated's a word. Desolate is a word, but I think you can desolate something, right? I don't even know.
Yeah,
but
sounds about right.
It's this desolated world and finding meaning in the smallness of the individual, which is something that in the Western world resonates with a lot of people, at the moment in particular. And Arrival, you know, reckons with kind of a changing understanding of our place in the universe, where before there was kind of this utopian vision of humanity will ascend to the stars and will connect with the world and we will be their equals. Arrival makes it so much more alien, with this sense that actually we're pretty small part of whatever's going on out there, and it's kind of frightening. So Cixin Liu's books, the Remembrance of Earth Past trilogy, does that as well.
I'm really surprised to hear you say that you believe in the collective subconscious. I mean, Jung did see it as like a literal shared place where the history of generations past lived. And
I mean, you're talking to someone who does not know Jungian psychology that well.
Yeah.
I said collective unconscious. You just mean like society's kind of shared concerns.
Yeah. No, but that's kind of the funny thing about Jung. And forgive me for bringing him up. Honestly, I wouldn't have if I knew like it wasn't interesting at all to you. But like that's the thing about Jung. He literally meant what he said, but he's been interpreted in hindsight as being very metaphorical with what he's saying, or allegorical.
I don't think humanity has a hive mind.
No, but that's what he thinks. Okay, and furthermore, he thinks that like we are predetermined archetypes, and we will then manifest our journey according to that. And it's just anyway, that's why you see, particularly with some of Jung's worst takes, that's why you find him pretty heavy on like the hard right of the internet, you know, because it's all about like predetermined destiny and power, and then, you know, bad takes of the Übermensch get thrown in there and stuff like that. So anyway, all right, this is one which I'm sure you keep the cards close to the chest, but how many different drafts do you have sitting in your computer of different stories? how many stories have you started that have their own unique world, characters, plot?
It's funny, you say, you know, like, I'm pretty sure you're going to play your cards close to the chest. I'm like, what on earth is he going to ask after he's asked all these previous questions about the other topics, like, about mental health and religion, and like, it's like, what on earth could this be? How deep is he delving? Okay, so, alright, I have half a draft of the first draft of this sci-fi novel that I'm writing. I have 4 drafts of, 4, maybe 4 complete drafts of my other book, my NA mental health book, sitting there. I have, and those were full rewrites, or at least the last one possibly wasn't a full rewrite. The first 3 were. I have a half of a book of a stupid Hogwarts, but it's Angels and Demons book. I have a few chapters of a cyberpunk dystopian post-apocalyptic steampunk book about twins who live in New Amsterdam, and one of them, the guy is the smart one, and the girl has a mechanical arm and leg, and it's like the brain and the brawn, and they're like twins. I thought it was a really cool dynamic, and to be perfectly honest, I would totally write that still. Like, the whole plan was they were gonna, you know, figure out that it's a world owned by it's a city owned by multiple corporations, and the corporations have a kind of feudal relationship with their employees. They sort of rule as monarchs over these like little parts of the city, and they have a tense relationship with one another. Doesn't matter. And then these twins find out that one of the companies is doing like brain transplants. I don't know. It's so dumb. And then I have a fantasy series which is buried deep inside my files somewhere. I have countless drafts of that. And to be clear, I'm not going to write that book. That book is done. I went scorched earth on it. It is never going to be published. Even
though it's completed.
2 of the books are complete. Complete in the sense that I have full drafts.
Tons of words down. Yeah.
Yeah. And 2.5 books, actually. It was, you know, like a lot of fantasy and science fiction writers that I am around, it's that baby series that they've been working on for years and years and years. And I started writing it when I was 12, and I quit writing it when I was 21, I think. And I rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it and rewrote it, draft to the number of times I cannot even tell you how many times I've rewritten it.
Why is it scorched earth then?
It's complicated, but basically, I realized years ago now that the book was never going to be finished, and the reason for that was I wanted the book to be something else, but I wasn't willing to let go of the elements that I invented when I was really young. And so there was this tonal inconsistency between the ideas I had when I was like 12, 13, and the story that I really wanted to write when I was like 21. There were the holdover of these cheesy, bad ideas that I had that I just wasn't letting go. And no matter how many times I was rewriting it, it was a cosmetic change, right? It was a cosmetic change. I can rewrite the beginning as many times as I wanted, but it was still about 4 kids who each had an element that they could control. Going and finding a magical world that they imagined was real. I mean, I was 12, you know. It's not like the worst idea, but I was never going to be happy with it because I both loved and hated those ideas that I had when I was young. And so I decided, I was like, I need to get away from this or I'm never going to write anything. And so I just decided to stop it. It was a learning process, and I needed to write other things. And so I actually went scorched earth on it after I wrote another book. I have 2 other books as well. Sorry. I stopped when I was like 20 or something like that, and I decided to write a romance novel, a YA romance novel. Basically, The Fault in Our Stars. It was called Letters to St. Jerome, and it was about two people who start exchanging letters without knowing who the other person is by leaving them in a certain spot in the library. And they find out who each other are, and they develop a relationship, and then one of them dies. It's nothing particularly profound. I wanted to write something different, and so I did. And I loved doing that. I loved writing from a new perspective. I loved writing in a new genre, and so I was like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And so I wrote another book the following year called Little Village East of Here, which was about three kids, three semi-adults, like 20, 21-year-olds, traveling Europe. And it was about kind of identity, about how much of who I am is decided by me growing up, and how much of who I am is my own choice. How much of who I am do I really have control over? And there was the struggle that I was sort of going through at the time. And I wrote
questions.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of drafts of both of those books as well. And yeah, so that's how many drafts I've got. Yeah.
Look, that's amazing. I didn't expect you to say so many fully completed books. I mean, that's hundreds of thousands of words. So, I mean, this is probably out of character, but I would like to hear about, if you could say at least, you said earlier you spend about 1 day a week writing. How do you find the time, or do you make the time? If you could say like a bit of a, not a hustle culture question, but just like, how do you do it? Like,
how do I do it? Well, with my...
How do you get so many words down, basically?
How do I do it? I wake up at 4 a.m. and only 4 a.m. and then you've got to make sure you have your protein shake. You've got to get that... It's...
Don't forget the cold showers.
Yeah. Yeah. I like warm showers. I love showers. I will stay in the shower for like an hour. No, it's... Okay, whenever someone asks me this question, they say, how do you do it? And I need to say this right up the front. I'm paid to do this, okay? It's part of my job. And I cannot explain how much of a help that the fact that I will make money when I do this stuff, that it can be counted as part of my work, is a motivator. And that means not only as a motivator, but I can just stop doing work during the day and write, I'm not writing in the evening. Well, I do write in the evenings as well, and like weekends, I absolutely do. But I can write during the week when everyone else is at work in offices doing jobs that they don't necessarily want to do. I'm so fortunate in having that opportunity, and being able to do that is just a totally different ballgame of being able to write. But, okay, with that out of the way, how do I do it? I set myself a low goal for the day, and usually that's 2,000 and a bit thousand words, and I just take my time. A lot of people will write, 8,000 words in a day or something like that, and I just can't do that. I need to think pretty deeply about how I write everything, and so 2,000. I usually get, if I have an 8-hour day, I'll probably get 2,000 to 3,000 words out. I got 3,400, 3,000 on the weekend. So 2 days.
And that's raw words, or that's edited, good to go?
Raw words. At the moment, I'm going through a first draft of a sci-fi novel. I'm about 40,000 words in. It's actually an expanded version of a short story, funnily enough. But, yeah, so I set myself a low goal, and I just let myself take my time. Put your phone away. Like, throw your phone on the other side of the room. Don't look at it. Disconnect yourself from the internet. Going to a physical place that is different. So, for example, when I write, I don't write at my desktop here with 2 screens. I write on my laptop. Because there's one screen which only has my book. I don't have anything else to look at. And I write in a different room. Because it's just feels different. When I'm in here, it feels like I'm in here to work on other things. And so having that physical space, that physical distance, a change of mindset is really helpful for me personally. Let yourself sleep beforehand. So on days that I want to write, I make sure I get sleep beforehand because, Gotta think a lot.
I was listening to an interview with Martin Amis. You're familiar with him?
No, I've never heard of his name.
Martin Amis is a famous British novelist, best friends of Christopher Hitchens. He wrote a great memoir called Experience. I think his most famous book is called Money. He's the son of Kingsley Amis, who's another really, really famous author who wrote a book called Everyday Drinking, which is one of the funniest books I've ever read in my life. But Martin Amis is like a savant when it comes to the English language. He wants it to be done perfectly, and he will like throw up in your face if you use a lazy cliche. He's like that type of guy. In an interview, he said that, and he's a full-time novelist, right? That's his job as well. He doesn't have anything else to do. He's not making YouTube videos. He's not running down business projects. Martin Amis just puts words onto a screen. And he said that he'll do about 100 pages a year. And I was like, that is
100 pages a year.
Unbelievable.
My goodness.
That's what he said.
Hang on, I need to look something up. What is Martin Amis's net worth? He's worth $20 million. That's why he can do 100 pages a year.
Yeah. But it's like a commitment to, I suppose, really, really good writing.
Yeah, I am definitely someone who prefers to do good writing rather than a lot of writing, because I'm just like, if I'm not gonna get anything from this in my second read, what's the point of writing it? And people go, well, you just got to get the words out on the page. But what I tend to find is I get the words out on the page and then regret where I took the words, and I have to go back and rewrite it.
Is there a thing in common that all great storytellers share? I know it's a bit of not a great question, but just since you've spent so much time thinking about storytellers and you've got such a wide sort of erudite knowledge of stories in general, is there something that the authors share that we can
The only thing that would come to mind is a form of empathy. The capacity to write inside the heads of another, probably. One that isn't you. It's often the mark of a great writer, for me, is the ability to take the mindset and the way someone thinks that is nowhere near you and to explore that in depth. And there's parts of you in all your writing. I know that much. But the ability to bring someone to life, I guess, who is not just you, is incredible. You look at Dostoevsky and stuff, and those characters that he's writing are obviously dealing with stuff that he dealt with in Crime and Punishment and stuff. But his capacity to write from the perspective of other people is just incredible. Shakespeare is the same, right? Shakespeare's characters are just so full of life and empathy, like, he is not King Lear and he is not Hamlet. He is not Othello. But the way that he brought those characters to life is just amazing. And so I think that is the case. You can tell when a writer is just sort of putting themselves in a book, or the character isn't really that in depth, Yeah. I think Jeff Vandermeer is very good at that as well. Yeah, absolutely. Who would I say is... Frederick Buckman's Beer Town is great as well with that. Yeah.
That's a great answer. I wasn't sure if anything was going to come out of it, but I really like that. Do you think empathy is experience or is it nature?
Oh, it's both, right?
One.
I mean, you've met people who are empathetic towards certain things because of their experiences. Some people might describe me that way in some senses, that I'm empathetic towards those with mental health problems, but not necessarily other problems. And so there are definitely experiences which make people more empathetic. But it's also nature. Some people are just way more empathetic by nature, and that's a great strength of theirs. Yeah, it's a mix.
Tim, listen, I've taken way too much of your time. You've been very generous by giving it to me as well. I just want to say, there's a couple more questions I'd like to ask, and one or two on world building, and then three that I like to ask every guest if possible. So
absolutely, let's go. I'm enjoying this conversation. This is really fun. This has been really deep questions. I've really enjoyed that.
Man, me too. And if it wasn't, recording, right, there is still a level of sort of performance that as the host need to guarantee, right? But otherwise I would just ask you rambling questions about Lord of the Rings and stuff, but maybe another time. But anyway, so I think about, well, classically, like the Eagles and Lord of the Rings, and what do you think about Deus Ex Machina events? Where do they fit into your worldview? Is it lazy, or I don't know? Is there something profound about them?
Like specifically to do with the Eagles? Like specifically?
No, not specifically the Eagles, but just generally as a.
I actually have a video on Deus Ex Machina coming out soon, specifically on whether or not a thing is Deus Ex Machina. But Deus Ex Machina is it's. The reason Deus Ex Machina sucks is because the audience feels like the problems are solved without any setup. When you've invested so much in the characters and their decisions and their skills, and you've kept track of like the little points of information that the reader has given you, and then suddenly a solution to the problem doesn't come from that information that the author has given you. It feels cheap. It feels annoying. It's kind of like, so all of that stuff that I knew, all the story, the build-up, what was it going to pay off to? Yeah. So there's that. It a lot of the times to do with kind of Chekhov's guns. Do you set up the thing in the first act that you're going to use in the third? And sometimes people think Deus Ex Machina, things are Deus Ex Machina when they're not. Often because something unexpected happens, but it's thematically relevant. So people read stories differently. Some people read stories very literally. Some people read stories very thematically. Some people read stories very psychologically, I guess. And what'll happen is that because of those different ways that people read things, they'll expect different endings. They'll expect the story to resonate with a particular type of ending. And I have encountered some stories, like Avatar: The Last Airbender is actually one example of this, where there's an ending that is thematically resonant. It fits with the setup of the story thematically, but it doesn't necessarily fit with the literal setup of the story, the things that the character has learned and we've been keeping track of. And that gets a lot of flack and criticism. So I can understand that in those cases, the Deus Ex Machina, it can be viewed as that. But it's also a bit more complicated than people often think.
And are the Eagles Deus Ex Machina?
Well, they don't really do much in the Lord of the Rings. Like, they said, like, Tolkien was asked, why don't they just fly? And he's just like, that'd be boring.
Is that what he said?
Well, he didn't say that exactly. He said that it wouldn't make for much of a good story or something along those lines.
That's almost like admitting that it was a weak point in the plot.
He said, the Eagles have been criticized before, and I don't really want to become too dependent on them, so I'm just not going to use them. Like, you can come up with, there's technically lore reasons, like the Eagles are the agents of Manwë, and Manwë was said that he couldn't intervene too much in the affairs of Middle-earth, and if they helped the ring get destroyed, they'd be directly intervening, which is what they're not meant to do. They're only meant to subtly do it, and you can argue that, but I mean, ultimately, Tolkien just made a thing that got a little bit too out of hand, and he didn't want to use them too much. That's basically it. Yeah, so there's that. The Eagles, they kind of help in The Hobbit a little bit, I guess. But The Hobbit is in a way a fairy tale, and Gandalf sort of does miraculous things, and then that's why he sort of vanishes from the story, because he can't help them escape out of everything. There's this sort of transition of Gandalf is keeping this group safe for the while. And as long as he is with them, they're safe. And you definitely get that, because he's this wise, powerful character. But then he leaves. And it's meant to be a tonal transition to, now Bilbo's on his own. Now Bilbo's got to make it... now Bilbo has got to figure stuff out. So there's that. And then at the end, like, the Eagles show up a little bit, but they're not fundamentally, like, they don't destroy the ring, and they don't fundamentally do that much in the battle. The battle changes once the ring's destroyed. So yeah, I'm not too hard on the Eagles. I especially don't really care, because I'm kind of like, I don't know, it's like a small discrepancy, I guess. It's at best a minor flaw. It's not something that I particularly care about, and Tolkien didn't actually end up using them that much. So yeah, at the end of The Hobbit, you could say that they're Deus Ex Machina, but it was Beorn that really turned the tide of the war, because he killed Bolg. Bolg. So, yeah. And Beorn was set up, so...
And did Gandalf say fly, you fools, or to literally fly? What's your take on that?
No, he did not. My goodness, that is the dumbest theory I've ever seen. Like... No, he did not. He did not say that. That's so dumb. Oh, he just said leave, go away, run.
Okay, you asked this question at the end of one of your videos, and I thought it was such a fantastic question. So I want to turn it on to you. What fictional place are you most sentimentally attached to?
Middle-earth, probably. Like, there's a lot of fictional worlds that I love and I'm attached to, but a lot of them are really bad. Like, I wouldn't want to live there. Whereas you kind of want to live in Middle-earth. It's a bit fantastical. It's a bit mythical. Maybe the Avatar world, theoretically. It'd be between those two, probably. Yeah. The only other one would maybe be Artemis Fowl, because Artemis Fowl was my Harry Potter. I grew up with Artemis Fowl, and being in Haven City and stuff like that would be pretty damn cool.
Cool. Finally, Tim, these are the three that I try to ask as many guests as possible. So the first is, what is a moment in your life when, looking back on it, you can't believe that you got to be a part of it? And let me know if you want more context for that question.
Oh my gosh, that I got to be a part of it. So it's got to be something
you were experiencing it,
sort of...
and you were like, how did I be so lucky? Or how did I get to be a part of this? This is so amazing. You said earlier sort of having a correspondence with an author that you loved when you were a younger boy. Yeah, something like that.
That one was definitely kind of... That was the most visceral example of, wow, look how far I've come, I guess. I can be a part of it, like, I published books, but that's not really the sort of thing you're going for. I would say the moment I turned up and I said, hey, I'm going to be meeting fans at this particular place at this particular time, and 25 people turned up, was insane. I was just like, oh my gosh, there's people here. That's crazy. So that was in Australia when I went to VidCon. So probably that moment at VidCon, or when I interviewed Brandon Sanderson and Christopher Paolini. Those would be the two most visceral, wow, I can't believe how far I've come moments that I've had. I haven't been a part of a huge number of things because I live in New Zealand, and being a part of things physically is very difficult. Nothing really happens in New Zealand, so at best I get like digital versions of that, you know. Yeah, and I guess the big wow moments for me tend to be just pondering the things that I get to do on a daily basis. But yeah.
You ever thought about relocating, you know, going to America and getting involved in the big bad gravitational pull of that nation?
You know, I've thought about it, but I'm a New Zealander at heart. I love living here. It is my home. There's nothing... It's perfect in so many ways. My girlfriend and I, my partner and I, we want to move to Europe for a couple of years, probably. Mm-hmm. I'd love to go live in Scandinavia. It's in some way. She'd love to live in Italy.
Yeah. Why Scandinavia?
Those are... I like the cold, and I like forests, and I like waterfalls, and I like, just that sort of thing. So.
Oh man. You gotta hit me up when you make that decision. Though I think your fiance actually probably has a better grip on the realities on the ground. To be honest, Italy is a much nicer place to live.
What? No, that can't be true.
Look, Tim, Scandinavia is unbelievably beautiful and a great place, no doubt about it. If you're coming here for the nature, you probably want to live in Norway somewhere. It's unbelievable, right? But there is a difference between popping in for a couple of weeks, soaking up the midnight, the aurora, the snow, you know, the 3-4 hours of daylight. There's a difference between popping in and doing that and then copping 6-7 months of it. Not every day is good weather. Most days aren't. My first year I was here, my first winter, December had 4 hours of sunlight a month. Because there was clouds so thick throughout the majority of the days. And yeah.
That's amazing.
I mean.
We also want to live in Germany. So, you know, there's Germany. Yeah. I have thought about it. I've never seriously contemplated going to America. I work online. I have friends in America, but I couldn't move to the United States. Like, it's just too big. I went to California once, and I stepped off, and I was like, it's just so dry. The air smells bad, you know, the water's terrible. It's just, oh my gosh. So I don't think I could do that.
All right, mate. I don't know if you saw, but this podcast is kind of largely geopolitical, which does make this for a for a random appearance. But it's only that way because it's an extension of my interest. Ultimately, this show is an extension of my interest. So I ask this question to as many people as I can. Pass it if you don't find it interesting. But what is a country that you're very bullish on looking into the future?
Very
bullish. Bullish on.
What's that mean?
You think you anticipate it to have a very bright future. If you're bullish on a share or a stock or a company, you think that they
before.
Yeah, it's like fundamental investing terminology, bullish and bearish. If you're bearish on something, you think it's going down. Bullish, you think it's going up.
Oh, okay. Short. Well, has a bright future.
You're bullish on it.
Yeah. So it depends what you mean by has a bright future. So China is probably going to keep ascending over the next while. It's becoming, I'm looking at American hegemony at the moment, and you're looking at the way that China is investing in Africa and the like, and it's definitely building its own geopolitical sphere. And what's really interesting is you can look at a map of recognition of Taiwan, of the countries that recognize Taiwan as a legitimate nation. And you can see over the last 20 years, it's been ticking down and down and down and down and down. Particularly as countries in Africa and the Middle East stop recognizing it, largely because of Chinese investment. And so China is ascending in that sense. And their quality of life is increasing and increasing and increasing. India is in many senses the same. Its quality of life is increasing rapidly. And they're becoming a world power of their own. I mean, they are a world power. They're the world's largest democracy. But yeah, we're going to keep seeing those trends. I think we're going to see a continual decline in Great Britain's hegemony and their influence in the world order, which we've already seen with the ascension of Germany being kind of the predominant European power now, as particularly under Merkel, But of course she's gone now, but the influence still there remains under Scholz. Countries that are going to continue, I reckon we're probably going to see. I think we're probably going to see. Oh man, it's like hard to put it all down into words. We're seeing Brazil become a bigger power, but I reckon I'm probably more interested in seeing South Korea and Japan ascending to heights that they currently aren't at. Yeah.
Fascinating. Nice. It's cool to see your own geopolitical worldview mapped out there. There's a great book called The Second Continent by Howard French. It does this unbelievable job at what you said there, sort of China buying influence in Africa. Him really getting on the ground for several years, several different countries, and explaining just how it is all happening. And it's largely a grim picture, as most things with China kind of tend to be, on the international stage at least. Yeah. Finally, Tim, this is my favorite question, and I'm very keen to hear who you answer. If you could witness a conversation between any two people of history, dead or alive, no language barrier. So if you were to listen to a podcast, who would you like to listen to?
I would love to listen to a conversation between maybe Shakespeare and Tolkien, or Oscar Wilde and someone like Ernest Hemingway. But if I was going political, then I'd love to hear a conversation between oh my gosh, my name's blanking on the German unifier. What's his damn name? The guy responsible for like German unification. What's his name? Looking it up. Von Bismarck. Bismarck. I'd love to see a conversation between Bismarck and someone like, you know what? Bismarck and Donald Trump would be really funny. That'd be hilarious. So let's go with them.
Nice. Love it, Tim. Love it. And yes, thank you for giving me the time despite my really unstructured interview today. I promise you they're not all like this, but I really I appreciate you giving me the time. It's a thrill. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
No, thank you very much for having me on. It was a real pleasure. And I like talking about some of that deeper stuff. It was great to talk. Yeah.
So thank you again, Tim. You absolute legend. Just for the audience who's still listening and still hanging around, we were in correspondence for a while, and this was actually recorded 6 months ago or something. And the intention was to just talk about Lord of the Rings. But the more I dove into his channel and the more I realized the depth of some of his videos, they kind of touch you. Some of them are very emotional. And as you saw with pieces of this conversation as well, Tim does have incredible depth, and I really liked him. So thank you again, Mr. Hickson, bro. And congratulations on the 1 million subscriber threshold, which I'm sure you will shortly plunder down. Now, my ambition for this podcast? What is my hope for this podcast? My ambition is to corner the podcast market for eclectic curiosities, no matter what country it is that you're listening in from. Now, key limitation to this ambition is the fact that there is no genre or category for eclectic curiosities. There is general interest, but that doesn't quite cover it, I think. And there are shows like How I Built This or Stuff You Should Know that just completely dominate this category. So if I am to somehow reach this ambition, I would just implore you, please, my dear, dear, dear listener who's listened this far in. Oh, and as well, I should say, to all the new listeners who potentially learnt about this podcast because of Tim, swipe up your phone and give me the juiciest, healthiest review that you can muster within your Spotify application. The same for Apple, the same for wherever you're listening to the podcast. Feed the algorithm with positive signals that the Curious Worldville podcast is being enjoyed and listened to, and share it with your mate, share it with your dog, share it with everybody that you think might be interested in this show. Again, Mr. Hickson, thank you very much, sir.